In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Good day, everyone. Nestor Licanto here with another edition of In Full Zoom. And this week we have our guest from the U.S. Department of Labor. But first, let me introduce Mr. Jose Carnevali, who is the Deputy Regional Director for Public Affairs for the U.S. Department of Labor, who's going to introduce our other guests. Go ahead, Jose.
Hi, Nestor. It's great to be with you and all your audience in Full Zoom. We look forward to engaging with you and your audience on this important conversation about labor rights. And without further ado, I will give you Mr. Terence Trotter. Terence, as you know, is the District Director for the department's Wage and Hour Division. He's based in Honolulu, but has jurisdiction over your wonderful island. So without further ado, I give you Terry.
All right. Thank you, Jose, and welcome, Terry.
Well, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, well, actually, the first question is we invited you on to the show because we got a couple of releases recently from Jose's shop about violations by contractors here in Guam. I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through those couple of cases that just came down.
Okay, there are a couple of construction cases. And one of the reasons we thought that we need to bring this to the attention of the Guam community was the nature of the violations. In these particular cases, the employer introduced policies into their workforces with a specific intent to disenfranchise the workers from their overtime earnings. And the one particular case, they're regular employees for the first 40 hours. And then after that, they became reclassified as independent contractors. And as independent contractors, that particular employer decided to pay them straight time wages instead of time and a half. In the other case, the employer worked them up to 40 hours, had a normal payroll check, but then decided for the overtime hours, he was going to pay them cash and also record those hours separately. So in both instances, we felt that these were willful violations and that they were going to be fined, and they were fined on top of the back wages that were recovered and returned to the workers. But the importance of these cases is that we want other employees, if they are within the community and they're being treated in a similar way, to feel free to come and contact the U.S. Department of Labor. And Jose has that number, and we're going to give it to you at some point at the end of the show. But we want to make sure that everybody understands that if you're not treated like an employee, which means if you work over 40, you have to get time and a half. You can't be converted into a cash payment, or all of a sudden you become an independent contractor when you were a regular employee for the first 40 hours, that you have baseline entitlement and you're entitled to receive your lawful earnings, your lawful overtime earnings. So the purpose of the release was just to put a sound out there into the community and just basically say, if this is happening to you, please contact us. There are a lot of legitimate, compliant construction contractors in your community, but we really need to flag ones that aren't compliant, and also get them to be compliant, obtain administrative agreements from them that compel them to be compliant, and then also other employers hopefully can see what has happened, and if they are doing something similar, make corrective changes.
Yeah. And obviously, the Wage and Hour Division is a division within the U.S. Department of Labor. And I was wondering if you could just kind of elaborate on your role and function and how that benefits not just the workers, but the community in general and even the contractors.
Right. Well, the Wage and Hour Division's purpose is to promote and also obtain compliance with the federal labor standards. What are the standards? What's their whole purpose? It's to safeguard the pay and working conditions as it relates to the Wage and Hour Division of the Pacific Islands community workers. So what we want to do is we want to go out into the community. We're going to do direct enforcement. We're going to obtain compliance where we need to obtain it. But at the same time, we need community engagement. Community engagement means we need to effectively leverage our resources. We only have 2 investigators, and there's roughly 800 licensed contractors in the Guam community. So we tried to strategically position ourselves with stakeholders, whether it be the Guam Contractors Association, it could be the Society for Human Resource Management. We even have a memorandum of understanding with the local Department of Labor as far as sharing information. They get calls, they may not be able to answer the call, or they may feel more properly in our lane, but we didn't receive the call. So they'll send us the information and we act on it. So our purpose basically is not just to be an enforcement agency or a collection agency, but also to be a compliance agency by being strategic, having significant partners that can help us achieve that aim, and also let the community know that we're available as a resource, employers and employees, to help them maintain the level of compliance that we'd all like to see with the federal labor standards.
And how does these benefits extend to the community in general?
Well, when an employer is putting in a bid for a contract, and let's suppose there's another contractor out there who's putting in the same bid for the same contract, both of them have workers. So, and they both going to get their materials probably roughly from the same places. So they're going to be looking for some competitive or some strategic advantages. It could be the quality of their work. It also could be on the cost of the bid. And what we want to make sure is that we have a level, fair playing field for the employers out there, so that when they're bidding on these projects, they're not losing out projects, and they could be federal construction projects as well, not just private contracts, that they didn't do it by lowering the lawful cost of the labor, the minimum standards for an occupational wage or the federal minimum wage, or even the overtime requirements. Because when they do that, they're getting access to work, but they're actually not paying the standards for the worker. So just like you have standards for a building that goes up, it's got to be of sufficient strength. You're out there on Guam, you have typhoons, you want it to hold up, you want it to safely house people. Similarly, for the workers, they have standards too. They're the same people who build those buildings. So it's just like there's standards for buildings, there's standards for people.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Yeah. You mentioned that you've got a grand total of 2 investigators for the entire community here in Guam. Obviously, that's quite a challenge as well. But are there other challenges that are unique to Guam?
Well, I think we're all being a little bit challenged right now with COVID. But we're working around that. And that's why having relationships in the community are important. We still receive calls from the community about the status of work at a particular site, whether the people are actually being paid the proper wages. We also want to make sure that the kids are employed properly. We've had situations where we've had to go out and take a look and make sure, is there a kid under the age of 18, a minor under the age of 18, operating a trash compactor, or perhaps on a roof at a construction site, or operating some type of equipment that they don't have the sufficient age to be able to be operating that. So the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're all as a community trying to maintain a certain level of understanding of the baseline labor standards. And if we all work together, we can create a community that has those standards, and those standards define who we are in that community. We don't want to have child labor violations. We don't want to have injuries with minors. We want to make sure when people work, they get paid. And if they're employees, they get treated like they're employees. And I think that's beneficial to employers and also to the workers. If I was to pivot a little bit and just say, I'm walking into a restaurant and I give my tip to the worker, that is not the property of the manager. You can go into a lot of different situations, not just construction, and you can talk about, okay, if I start work at the gasoline station, but I'm required to be there 15 minutes early to set up my station or prepare myself for the beginning of the shift. Well, it has to be paid, but I'm only scheduled to be paid, and I'm only paid for my scheduled time. Well, then that becomes a problem because it's not recording all of your hours worked. And then you're not getting overtime when you work over 40 because it didn't count all that time. So although we're talking a little bit about construction right now, it's standards for all types of industries and all types of situations. And all of us at some time or another, we're all employees. And just like there's standards for the food that's being served, standards for the healthcare that we receive, and just like we talked about, standards for buildings that want to go up, there's standards for our servers, there's standards for the healthcare providers, and there's standards for construction workers.
Yeah. Guam has a level of its own local construction workforce, but we also do rely substantially on foreign H-2 labor. Can you discuss the differences maybe in trying to watchdog over local construction employees versus foreign labor? Or is it the same?
I think, no, well, it is different. Let's suppose I'm a local worker and I work at a particular business, and I decide that, okay, maybe I want to go work for somebody else. Or maybe I don't like the standard that I've been given as it relates to how much they want to pay me, or if they're going to pay me straight time. I may call the Department of Labor. I may just go work for somebody else who's going to treat me differently. When you're a foreign national worker, you tend to be a little bit more vulnerable because your visa is linked specifically to the employer. So when you're approached to do something that would circumvent a baseline standard within the Guam community, you have more limited choices, or you could be sent home. So then you can become part of the problem in the sense that, oh, well, my employer said I'm going to get cash. That's a little bit better from where I'm coming from, even if it's at straight time for the hours over 40. I think I should accept that. It's as opposed to somebody who's fully enfranchised within the community and has a better opportunity for holding their employers accountable. So these workers tend to be a little bit more vulnerable and more susceptible to secondary agreements that circumvent federal standards.
Yeah, obviously any kind of abuse is wrong, but can you point to some of the more egregious cases that you've come across over the years? Well,
it's been a number of years. I mean, I've been with the Wage and Hour Division since 1985, but I mean, we know, I mean, even within the last year, these are a couple of the cases, but there's other cases that have happened in the construction industry of a similar nature, which did involve about 19 H-2B workers, and they were asked to, again, receive straight time pay for their hours after 40, and the records were kept separately. And also at first, they weren't even shown to the Wage and Hour investigator. So it's really not about how big and how strong the violation is, it's how it impacts all of us. These particular workers in these two cases were made whole. In that particular case that I'm referring to, we already had a press release out on it, and it was addressed within the community. But the other collateral damage is when other employers who also have their own workers become under or unemployed because they didn't have access to those other projects in which they had intended to pay people their legal lawful wages. So, and again, I'm just talking about the Guam community. I think we understand right now, we are also out in Saipan, which is about a half-hour plane ride away from Guam, and we have 2 investigators there too, and we're quite busy out there right now too.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
When we speak of violations, it usually involves the employer making violations against the employee, but has there ever been where it's reversed, where the employees are duping their employer?
Well, what employers do is they have labor policies and they set up standards, and then they have the ability to hire and fire, and also review the employee's work and make determinations as to whether they're going to get promotions, demotions, or in some cases let go. Our job isn't to do that. Our job is just to make sure that the federal labor baseline standards are met. So to the extent that a worker is employed by the company, they're entitled to a baseline minimum wage and also overtime pay, and they need to have their hours counted correctly. So to that extent, that's where our focus is. If we go into an establishment and we're aware of they have labor policies, we let the employer monitor their own labor policies. Our job is to make sure that the standards passed by Congress through different statutes, and this particular one is called the Fair Labor Standards Act, that they're adhered to.
Yeah. As you probably know, Guam has really ramped up its construction industry. The construction industry in general is kind of like a peaks and valleys, and we're definitely peaking because of the military buildup, the construction of the Marine Corps base camp, Camp Bloss. Have you seen a lot more of activity, and is that added to your work?
Well, we definitely read the media out there, and we're familiar with a lot more projects being let, and some of them are quite substantial, and they do relate to the relocation, it would seem, of the Marines to Guam under the, I guess it's the Defense Authorization Act. As such, when they do construction that's federally funded under that act, we have something called the Davis-Bacon Act. And the Davis-Bacon Act is different than the Fair Labor Standard Act. It doesn't say, oh, you have to get at least the minimum wage. Minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It'll get into what's your occupation? What do you get paid as an electrician? What do you get paid as a mason? What do you get paid, as a plasterer? They have wages that are set higher than the baseline federal minimum wage. And my job with my team is to make sure first there's an awareness of this. What the contracting officers do is they put the standards in the contract, and they do this with wage rates so that when everybody's bidding on it, they can't say, well, I'm going to decide that an electrician should get $10 an hour when they're due 15. Everybody has to at least put their bid in on these minimum wages for these occupations. And so we will meet with the contracting officers. We've met with them before. We explain to them what our laws are so they can be the eyes and ears for us at the job site. And then we'll go visit the job site and make sure that the workers are paid. And some of these workers, they haven't been paid what their occupational wage rates are. They may jump between categories, and it could be confusing for the employer. Our job is to make sure that the employer knows if they're going to jump into different categories of work at a federal job site, that they have to segregate the work out and pay people accordingly. And I also want to say too that not every time somebody violates the law that they do it with intent. So that's why it's so important for us to have community engagement, have education outreach seminars, and to make sure that people who want to comply with the law can comply with the law and they get the information that they need.
And that's a very good point, Terry. We don't want to give the impression here that the Guam construction industry is filled with companies that try to shortcut or circumvent the law, because that's absolutely not the case. And I'm sure a lot of the employers here, the contractors, the Guam Contractors Association. So how would you assess the Guam construction industry as a whole?
Well, I'd say it's a dynamic relationship between the wage-hour division and the construction contractors themselves. It's a lot easier. For example, if I want to have an outreach meeting, I know that I can go to James Martinez of the Guam Contractors Association. I've known James for many years. I also have a local assistant district director there. He also can work with James. If we have issues, when I come out to Guam, I try to meet with James. If I believe that there's going to be a lot of construction activity, I can let him know the importance of the Davis-Bacon Act, or if I have a seminar coming up on that, that's important. And I feel comfortable that there's enough people there in Guam, in the contractor community, that want to do the right thing. And we've been invited, and we've discussed compliance with them. But I'd hate to give a report card because I haven't done a scientific survey of all the work out there and how compliant everybody is. But to the extent that people want to be in compliance, but they're seeking more knowledge, we can help them about how to stay in compliance with the law. To the extent that people are just thinking of ways that how can I enter into sub-agreements and perhaps be more competitive in my bids, then I think that we need to be strategic again and as best we can be at those locations where people are violating the law. We're going to return the wages to the workers, but it also has the ripple effect of making sure that future bids are more competitive and fair.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc. GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information. In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
All right. Is there anything, any topics that we didn't cover that you'd like to elaborate on, either yourself or we have Jose still standing by?
So Nestor, I think first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. I think this has been very, very enlightening and informative, and I hope that your audience also thinks that way. I think Terry mentioned something that is very key, which is the community engagement. The Wage and Hour Division is eager to assist, to help, to educate not only employees, but also employers. We want to be a community of goodwill and in order to achieve compliance, making sure, as Terry said, that if you work, you are entitled to minimum standards under federal law, and you have to comply with those standards. And I think that is a win-win situation. Other than just following the law, but it's a win-win situation for everybody. And in this particular case on Guam, these two recent cases, one of them, 43 construction workers received more than $202,000 in $100,000 in back wages. In another case, most recently, 23 workers received $53,000. I think this sends the right tone. It encourages everybody to be in compliance. And again, we could not be more thankful to the fact that we received so many calls from both employers and employees seeking assistance, help. And the Wage and Hour is there to provide those tools. So again, thank you so much, Nestor.
All right, and Terry, we'll give you the final word.
Okay, I would like to say 671-473-9131. That is our number. If people in the Guam community would like to call our local Wage and Hour Division office. And if you want to learn more about all the Department of Labor agencies, just go to dol.gov. That's dol.gov. You can learn more also about OSHA. You can learn how we try to enforce equality amongst wages for contractors and their employees who are bidding on federal construction and services, as well as many other services, including the Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training. There are many services that we do offer that you could educate yourself on at this website.
Yeah, I did have one more question. I'm sorry. Do you work also with the embassies or the consulate offices for? Sure. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Right. The Federated States of Micronesia has a consulate office, as well as does the Philippine consulate, and we want to make sure that they understand that their workers, when they're working in Guam, have a baseline understanding of what their entitlements are. And so we've met with those embassies, and we provided outreach material, but we've also set up meetings and talked with workers, specifically with the Philippine consulate, with the H-2B workers coming in, and had meetings and made sure that they understand what their baseline wages that they're entitled to. So it is important. Everybody's part of the community, and we can all help one another to become educated and hopefully avoid problems so that we can also be more of a compliance agency, not just a collection agency. But we do both.
And again, the number is 671-473-9131. More information at dol.gov.
All right, thank you very much. That's Jose Carnevali, who is the Assistant Public Affairs Director for the U.S. Department of Labor for the region. And Terence Trotter is the District Director for the Wage and Hour Division. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. Appreciate all the information, all the knowledge.
Nestor, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
All right. And that'll do it for this edition of In Full Zoom. I'm Nestor Licanto. We'll see you again next week.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.